It's lovely to welcome you all tonight. And I think I will get going and people can join as they do. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's talk. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bethany Gaunt, and I'm Associate Director of the Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Centre. The centre was set up several years ago by Lady Esther, who joins us tonight, and Sir Harry Solomon to honour Sir Martin's legacy and try to share his way of bringing history alive for all. We offer talks on a range of subjects linked to Sir Martin's research fields, as well as sessions and resources for secondary school history teachers. I really wish that I was welcoming you today under better circumstances. Usually these talks are a joyful time when we can come together to share our love of modern history topics, a learning community from around the world, united by common interests. Lady Esther, as many of you will know, had planned to give a talk on quite a different topic today, and we look forward to when she returns to speak about Sir Martin's writing of the Churchill biography. However, that talk didn't feel right for right now. The centre expresses its profound horror at the attacks carried out by the terrorist organisation Hamas in Israel, and we're shaken to the core by the unprecedented brutality and sadism of these terrorist acts, targeting innocent civilians, including children, the elderly, and babies. This was not a political act, it was an act of hatred, and our thoughts and prayers are with all those who are living in distress, grief, and uncertainty as this war continues to unfold. Hamas launched its pogroms against Israel 50 years almost to the day after the outbreak of the Yom Kippur War, and many have drawn attention to the parallel. While it may be too soon to fully analyse those claims, it seemed apt that tonight Lady Esther shares extracts from Sir Martin's diary from when he was on the ground in Israel, experiencing those events firsthand. As we hear about a war initiated with a surprise attack on Israel, we fervently wish for a swift and humane conclusion to the current war. Lady Esther has graciously agreed to share Sir Martin's war recollections with us, and it's wonderful to welcome her back for this talk. Esther works tirelessly to keep Sir Martin's legacy alive, and if you're not familiar with her website, please do visit martingilbert.com for a veritable treasure trove of information about his works. After Esther's talk, there will be time for comments and questions. I know most of you will share our shock and distress at this time, and so I ask that you be respectful in the comments box. But without further ado, I will now mute myself and hand over to Esther.
Thank you, Bethany. In 1962, Martin joined Randolph Churchill's research team working on the Churchill biography. This talk was meant to be about that process, how Martin came to write the biography and what he learned from it about writing history. History has since overtaken us, so with the center's permission and yours, we've postponed that talk and will focus on more recent events. In October 1973, Martin, aged 37, went to Israel to research Churchill's 1921 visit there. He kept a personal diary, and I'd like to read to you a few excerpts from that diary. 2 excerpts of the diary have been published and are available online. One is on his martingilbert.com website under his travels. If you scroll down, you'll find the description of the first hours of the war on October 6th. The second was published in September in the Jewish Chronicle as part of their 50-year commemoration of the Yom Kippur War. It is a description of his visit to the Golan on October 18th. Also, the diary was the basis for the Yom Kippur War chapter in Israel, a History. Bethany will post the links in the chat. There have been connections made between the 1973 October or Yom Kippur War and the current horrible situation. The main similarities are that first, Israel was unprepared for the surprise attacks, both in 1973 and in 2023. Secondly, both attacks against Israel were timed to be launched during Jewish holidays, holy days, in Israel and for Jews everywhere. In the main, the similarities end there. The 1973 Yom Kippur War was an invasion of armies from neighboring countries of Egypt and Syria, and eventually Iraq, armed by Russia. The Israelis involved in the main were military personnel. What is happening now began more like a pogrom. The term comes from the Russian pogromage, which means to strike continuously. It came to refer to attacks against Jews and Jewish communities in Tsarist Russia that involved torture and looting, rape and murder. Pogroms were organized by the Russian military and police forces and were carried out by local townspeople and peasants. They were the precursor to the ferocity of attacks on Jews in Eastern Europe during the Holocaust by local collaborators who assisted the Einsatzgruppen German murder squads. If you've been keeping up with the news that unfolded on October 7, you will know that this invasion, this attack, was directed against babies who were ruthlessly murdered, women raped, and children, men, women, and older people murdered or taken hostage, their homes and properties destroyed. A pogrom. Along with Israel's military response, you should know that Jewish schools, synagogues, and community centers around the world outside of Israel have had to check and step up their security arrangements in fear and in the face of an escalation of violence against Jews beyond Israel's borders. This is not a normal war by a neighboring country's army, but an attack on Jews. So why then Martin's 1973 diary? Whenever I watch the news, I want to turn to Martin to see what he would say. I can't do that now, so I turn to his writing to have a sense of what he viewed as important and how he reported it. I thought his experiences and conversations in October 1973 might give us a behind-the-scenes glimpse of Israel under attack. What follows are some readings from his private October 1973 diary. Sorry, I'm with you. Okay. One note, I'm just coming off of a chest cold. So if I start coughing uncontrollably, don't worry, I have 2 cups of hot drinks here to keep me going. So this comes from the introduction that he wrote to the diary itself. I arrived in Israel on the evening of October 4, having been given a research scholarship to complete the Palestine chapters of Sir Winston Churchill's official biography. As part of the scholarship, I was provided with a rented car. The car was waiting at Lod Airport on the evening of 4 October. This diary is my personal account of what happened during the rest of October, of what I myself saw of a nation at war. All the conversations recorded in it are transcripts of the verbatim notes taken at the time. Many of these notes were jotted down while I was driving, and some were taken down in almost total darkness. Although a diary such as this is very much a single perspective, I hope that it gives at least some picture of the thoughts, fears, and anxieties of the people of Israel during the last 3 weeks of October 1973. I'd also like to say that I haven't done any visuals, any PowerPoint. I think we've had enough visuals, and this is more to concentrate on what Martin wrote. Martin was based in Jerusalem, and this is from Saturday, October 6th. He also, with his diaries, he gives the time because the chronology was important to him. 6:30 a.m., woken from a deep sleep by jets flying low overhead. I would have thought that many Jews would be angered to be woken up on this holy day by such a loud and military noise. Certainly the pilots would not be flying if the rabbis had their way. 12 noon. What a strange day the Day of Atonement is. All shops are closed. All petrol stations are closed. There are no buses, no taxis, virtually no private cars on the road. All broadcasting is closed. There is no television, no newspapers. A whole nation is at prayer or indoors. Those who are fasting spend most of the day in the synagogue. Those who do not observe the religious practices remain indoors. 12:45. There are more people in the street, walking slowly from the synagogue to their homes during a break in the services. They are carrying their prayer books under their arms. From the synagogue comes the sound of chanting as the morning service ends. A car rushes past with headlamps on, and a squeal of tires as it goes round a corner, causing several puzzled expressions. 1 p.m., arrive at my host's house. His host was Yigal Yadin, who became a politician. He was also one of the main architects in Israel. Arrive at my host's house and ask him, why the headlights? He says, for funerals. It seems strange that people would go to funerals at such a pace, particularly on such a day as this. 2:02 p.m. We hear our host starting up his car, but as we listen, it is a strange noise that fills the air. Not a car engine at all, but a siren. What is that? I ask. An air raid warning, replies my host's wife. Do they happen often? I ask her. There has not been one since the Six-Day War, since June 1967, comes the reply. Everybody looks puzzled. What are we meant to do? Go to the shelter. Do you have one? Of course. Do we go into it? Of course not yet anyway. After a few moments, the siren stops. We are silent. 2:30 p.m. There's a feeling of emptiness in the room. What is happening? We fiddle with the wireless, but all Hebrew stations are silent. There's no broadcasting on the Day of Atonement. People are now running about in the street, hurrying home from the synagogue. There are many more cars, all driving at great speed. A second siren. What do we do? I ask my host's wife. Let's see if the wireless will come on, she says. We turn on the wireless again. Someone is speaking in Hebrew. It is a news flash. The sirens, says the announcer, are not a false alarm. When the siren goes again, everyone must go to their shelter. That is all. No explanation of what is happening, of why the sirens should ring on the Day of Atonement. No one knows what to say. Can there really be danger? We keep the wireless on. There is nothing but music. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. We all listen in silence, waiting. 3:30 p.m. News flash. Egypt and Syria have attacked. Partial mobilization has been ordered. 4 p.m. News flash. All inessential traffic to keep off the main roads. Petrol stations are opening at once. There's no more news. When the news flash ends, classical music returns, still Beethoven. We sit in silence, gloomy, listening, waiting. 4:15, news flash. When the siren goes again, everyone is to go to their shelter. 4:20, news flash. All public road transport is to start at once. An emergency hospital has been opened for military casualties. All non-emergency patients in hospital will return home. 4:55 p.m., 2 old ladies arrive. One of them brings Scotch tape to stick on the windows in case of an air raid. Both ladies are over 80. Both came to the country when it was still under Turkish rule. Since the establishment of Israel 25 years ago, they've watched younger generations fight 4 times for the preservation of their state. One old lady looks combative, the other looks sad. The combative one tells us that she still has the tape on her windows from the Six-Day War 6 years ago, when the Jordanians shelled the residential areas of Jerusalem and many private homes were damaged. And we move on to Wednesday, October 10th. This is the Russian dimension. 6 p.m., news. Iraqi planes are said by Iraq to have been in action against the Israelis in the Golan. This makes it 3 nations against 1. 8:30 p.m., Golda Meir speaks on television. She speaks bitterly of Soviet arms supplies to Egypt and Syria. Her head is bowed. She says that even now, Russian missiles of the latest type are being flown into Syria continuously, and that both the Syrians and the Egyptians are using the most modern Russian weapons. Everything that is in the hands of the Syrian and Egyptian soldier, she says, all this comes from the Soviet Union. She appeals to King Hussein of Jordan not to join the attack. Surely, she asks, he has learned his lesson in 1967 when he was goaded to attack by false tales from Egypt that the defeat of Israel was imminent, and when he lost, as a result, the West Bank of the Jordan and East Jerusalem. Israel, says Mrs. Meir, will not allow itself to be wiped out. The Jews must not allow themselves the luxury of despair. I have but one prayer in my heart, she says, that this will be the last war. 10:30 p.m. There's great gloom everywhere. The confident expectations of Monday have simply faded away. Everyone realized that Egypt and Syria had been equipped by Russia to such an extent that Israel was outnumbered in armor by at least 4-1. Some people realized that the quality of the Russian equipment was far superior to what Russia had provided before, and superior to the Israeli armament. But what has shaken people now is that Russia is still, while the battle rages, sending in massive supplies, the most modern tanks, the most effective anti-tank missiles and aeroplanes. It looks as if any Israeli success on the battlefield, as it were in the morning, will be offset by material flown in from Russia during the morning. 11 p.m., think about my friend's suggestion that I should leave. Fall asleep wondering if I will wake up to find that Hussein has joined the war, and half expecting to be woken up by gunfire. Tuesday, October 11th. 8:50 a.m. A loud explosion. A friend comments tersely, most likely a terrorist act. The war suddenly seems very near. We discuss the weapons available in the house, an old carbine. I look out of the window down the street in the direction of Jordan, trying to remember my old National Service training about angles of fire. 10 a.m., drive to the Jerusalem municipality. The building is a creation of the British Mandate in the style of 1930. I join the list of driver volunteers, anyone in Jerusalem who has a car and who is willing to put it to some use. A large number of volunteers are sitting and standing in the corridor. We are both asked to report at 6 in the evening. 6 p.m., arrive at the municipality on chauffeur duty. 6:30 p.m., take 6 American volunteer students to a bakery on the outskirts of town. It is dark, no street lights are on, and all traffic lights have been extinguished. A somewhat hair-raising drive, as my own headlamps are effectively blacked out, although here and there where someone has not obeyed the blackout regulations, a bright beam of light floods across the street. 7 p.m. news. The Syrian oil refineries at Homs are burning. 7:35 p.m. Return to the municipality. Take 2 school children volunteers to deliver telegrams in one of the residential areas of the city. One of the 2 postmen is my host daughter, age 17. 8 p.m. return to the municipality to be told the news that Israeli forces are 10 kilometers inside Syria on the road to Damascus. 8:10, hijacked by 3 students who want to go to their homes in the suburb. On the road, police are stopping all cars and enforcing the headlight blackout with dark blue paint. 9 p.m., sent away from the municipality as there are so many volunteer drivers that those who have already done something are asked to let the others have a turn. Before leaving, talk to an American volunteer, a man of about 45, who tells me that every year, after he has paid out his income tax to the American government, he makes out a check for exactly the same amount to Israel. October 13, 2 p.m. He's in Jerusalem throughout this time. 2 p.m. On the Suez Canal, we learn there is an Israeli unit trapped in a bunker that has fought, surrounded since the first hours of the war. The men do not want to surrender, but they've been told by headquarters that they can surrender if they wish. 8 men in the unit have been killed. 17 are wounded. Only 5 are still able to fight on. But even now, surrounded as they are and under constant bombardment, they hesitate to surrender. They do not want to give up, and they are afraid of what will be done to them when they are captured. Headquarters are trying to arrange for a special Red Cross group to supervise the surrender if the men decide to give up. An officer telephones. The situation in the north is good, he says. The Syrians are now defending Damascus, not attacking Tiberias. It is the situation on the Suez Canal that seems most serious for Israel at the moment. Most unsatisfactory, as another officer puts it. If we had to accept the present line, he says, we could only obtain security by permanent mobilization. We cannot afford this. We are a civilian nation. We must devote all of our manpower, which is relatively so small, excuse me, to constructive things, to agriculture, to industry, to education. No one will be able to bring about a ceasefire until we've got a secure defense line, until we have at least got back to the Sinai bank of the Suez Canal. Sorry, it's the breathing that does it. We must get back what we need before any ceasefire. We cannot afford vulnerable frontiers. We cannot, like the Syrians, keep 800,000 men permanently under arms, not only because we want to lead the life of civilians, but because we do not have that number of able-bodied men in the country. When fully mobilized, we do not have more than 400,000, of whom over 2/3 are civilians with ordinary lives to lead. No Security Council resolution could stop us again from getting to the line we need for a secure defense. Such a resolution simply would not be made. It is the same for the Egyptians. They will not agree to the present line, even though it is so disadvantageous for us. For as long as they think they can reconquer the whole of Sinai, they will fight on. They do not have the same attitude to losses as we do. Sadat has said several times he is prepared to sacrifice 1 million men to reach his goal. 4 p.m., we return to the municipality for volunteer driving duties. There's no work to be done, only a crowd of disgruntled volunteers who are angry or at least frustrated that their services are not required. I decide to set up a one-man taxi service for soldiers and spend 3 hours driving about the city, mostly from the bus station to the center and from the center to the suburbs. Everyone seems glad of the chance of getting home as quickly as possible. Many have not seen their parents since the day the war began and have been unable to get any messages through to them. 8:30 p.m., Golda Meir gives a televised press conference. She speaks in English, giving brilliant answers to many awkward and several silly questions. She stresses Israel's hatred of war and hatred of violent death, and emphasizes her government's desire for direct negotiations with the Arabs. And here we are again, she says, in a war which we did not want, which we did not initiate. She goes on, we know that giving up means death, means destruction of our sovereignty and physical destruction of our entire people. Against that, we will fight with everything that we have within us. Sunday, October 14th, 8:25 a.m. The BBC correspondent in Cairo reports that the last Israeli outpost on the Suez Canal has now surrendered, that the men have been assured by the International Red Cross that they will be treated according to the Geneva Convention, and that yesterday, watched by journalists brought specially from Cairo, the prisoners were ferried across the canal to Egypt. 10 a.m., continue my volunteer driving duties, drive soldiers to their home. Several of them are lightly wounded. After driving 3 soldiers to the headquarters of the Central Command on the Jerusalem-Ramallah Road, spend 20 minutes alone at the British cemetery on Mount Scopus. The cemetery contains the grave of over 2,000 British soldiers killed in the First World War, and also has a memorial to all those officers and men who were killed in Egypt and Palestine, but have no known grave. Martin could not pass a military Commonwealth war grave cemetery without stopping to pay his respects. 12:30 p.m., continue driving throughout the afternoon. Take nurses from hospital to their homes and collect nurses from their homes for the next shift. Take parents from hospital to their homes. During the drives, I noticed troops dumping sand and bags at different points throughout the city and watch volunteers making sandbags. 5 p.m. news. The first casualty figures are announced. So far, 656 Israelis have been killed in action. Everywhere I go, there is deep gloom. Everyone is shocked that so many soldiers and pilots have been killed. Most of the dead are 18 and 19-year-old boys who were doing their national service when the war began, or civilians who were doing reserve duty at the front when the attack came. They say that many of the reservists on the canal came from Jerusalem: clerks, taxi drivers, shopkeepers. 7 p.m., meet a schoolgirl volunteer postman who has been delivering telegrams for the post office. Today, she found herself delivering a telegram announcing, "Your son is dead." She watched in horror as the bereaved mother beat her head on the floor in grief. As nearly all the postmen are mobilized, there is no one else to deliver these telegrams but schoolgirls and schoolboys. Quickly, however, in order to spare the volunteers from such distressing scenes, and bravely too, those mothers who lost their sons in the last war now offer to deliver the telegrams to those who are losing them now, and to bring with the telegrams such comfort as they who have experienced this can bring. I think Martin told me that he went to the authorities and said, "You can't have these children doing this. You have to find other people." 7:30 p.m., drive home from the butter and cheese factory. The news that over 600 have been killed has reduced even the garrulous to silence. There is certainly that nothing I, as a stranger, can say. Thursday, October 18th. So this is excerpts from the day that he drove 3 journalists to the Golan Heights. It's in the Jewish Chronicle. It's more of a graphic description. So I picked excerpts now of the drive up and the drive back. He's driving with a Israeli captain who's there as an escort, and he's driving 2 journalists from the Baltimore, 2 Baltimore journalists and 1 British journalist to see what's going on there. 10:15 a.m. We crossed the Daughters of Jacob Bridge into the Golan. The Jordan is only a stream. On either side of the road, the heights are still mined with the Syrian mines of 1967. The captain comments, "For some reason or other, we do not have time to clear the mines." We pass Syrian fortified positions right on the old border and looking straight into the eye of the agricultural settlements which they used to shell, the Hula swamp, which Israel has drained and turned into a paradise of fruits and vegetables. Since 1967, they could at least go about their daily business without armor plating on their tractors, sleeping in underground shelters, and sending their children from home to school through deep fortified trenches zigzagging through the settlements. The Six-Day War ended that terrible price for existence, the captain says, at least since 1967, since we hold the Golan Heights and pushed the Syrian guns 15 miles away. Our children could walk to school upright along proper paths and did not have to sleep underground. That is why we regard the possession of the Golan Heights as essential to preserve a civilian way of life. If the Syrians had cared to turn their guns into tractors and the Golan Heights into an agricultural paradise, there would simply have been no reason for us to take anything east of the Jordan River. The Daily Express lady comments, all that Western chat about how the Israelis didn't really need the Golan Heights is a load of rubbish. And this is 3:30 p.m. coming back from the Golan. The captain and I discussed the problem of war as far as Israel's daily life is concerned. She only has a standing army of about 80,000 men, yet to fight a war, she must mobilize over 300,000, and even then she is outnumbered numerically, perhaps as much as 2 to 1. Once mobilized as now, the civilian life grinds almost to a halt, and Israel's workers, her students, her shopkeepers, put on their uniforms and go to the front. Israel cannot be mobilized 12 months of the year, the captain says with emphasis, and he goes on. A state of war eats into our daily life. Mobilization throws a terrible burden on our economy. We are a civilian nation. We want peace with our neighbors because we want to be able to go back to our civilian life, to go on trying to build up a good society. 3:35 p.m., we reach the Kunetra Road and drive on towards Ginosar. During the drive, I reflect on the spirit of the people of Jerusalem, on the strange camaraderie of the blackout, of the improvised window covers, of the flickering torches in the darkened streets, and of the civil defense men crying out from the street whenever they see a window not properly darkened. I think too of the schoolgirls delivering telegrams, simple volunteer work, which suddenly turns into a nightmare when the telegrams they are delivering contain news of the death of a soldier. I think of the volunteer drivers wending their way through darkened streets, their cars crammed full with volunteer workers going to a bakery, or soldiers picked up at crossroads, hoping for an hour or two with their parents before returning to the front. I remember the quiet gathering of old and young outside the concert hall, going to a charity concert in aid of the Soldiers' Welfare Fund, and women going from door to door collecting transistor radios and sweets and games to send to the soldiers at the front. I remember too, so few hours ago, the terrible sharp crack of the explosion of shells, far louder and far sharper than anything I could have imagined, piercing the ears and making the heart jump. 4 p.m., we reach the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The captain points with pride at the plantations along the roadside and remarks, "There are bananas for you." The sun is low on the horizon, the heat still intense, the fields green, the lake still, a scene of the utmost peace. October 20th. So Martin is driving soldiers back to their base. 9:30 a.m. We are approaching Afula. In the past a half hour, over 20 Israeli transporters have passed in the opposite direction, driving back from Tiberias, carrying captured Soviet tanks. The tanks have already been repainted, looking like new. They are new. And with bright colored canvas or cloth on their bonnets, if tanks have bonnets, to indicate the aircraft that they are in Israeli hands. As we pass them, one of the Israelis remarks, "We do not want tank him, we want peace." At the roadside, being overtaken by a tank, An Israeli Arab trots by on his donkey. One thing that has most surprised and pleased Israelis is the way in which the Arabs who have been inside Israel since 1948 have volunteered to help in the war effort, to drive trucks, to give soldiers lifts, to help in shops and factories whose Israeli occupants have all been mobilized, even to donate money. One of the soldiers says to me, "We know we can live in peace with these Arabs, and if we can live in peace with them, why not with all Arabs?" Another of the soldiers says, "But we must now really do much more to try to understand the Arabs, to work with them in a more positive way, even to learn their language." 9:35 a.m. We reach Afula and drive on towards Tiberias. Although everything around us is still civilian and there is no sense of approaching a war zone, the soldiers are clearly becoming more tense. I watch their eyes in my rear mirror. When they are not talking, all life seems to go out of them. I shudder to think what it is they have seen and experienced in the last 2 weeks, and how strange it must have been for them to go back to civilization, if only for a few hours. I talked to one of the soldiers, a bank clerk in the Bank Hapolim, mobilized at the beginning of the war as a gunner. He was born in Morocco. His parents were immigrants to Israel, part of the great influx of Moroccan refugees over a decade ago. He says that he has just been home for 24 hours. "My mother did not know I was coming. It must have been a surprise for her." Yes, a sad surprise. He goes on. "My mother says to me, 'Why must you go back to the war?' I said, 'If I do not go back, and my friend does not go back, who will go back? Who will fight to defend us?' Last night, I slept at home in Jerusalem. There was such a silence. I do not usually sleep with such a silence, but with the noise of shells and bombs and planes. I tell you, you want to go back to the front. You don't want to leave your friends there. That is my family. But how can I explain that to my mother? She cried when I left." The first day at the front, I felt frightened, but now he falls silent. But after a few minutes, begins to talk again, and I do not really have to ask him any questions at all. He simply wants to talk. This is what he says. "It was a great surprise to be called up. I did not think I would ever leave my work at the bank, that it would go on year by year without change. I was with a friend when we heard the news that we had been mobilized. I phoned home. My father told me, 'You have been called up.' When I reached home, my parents had already prepared my clothes. All was ready. All I had to do was say goodbye. I'm only a reservist. I did 3 years in the army, but now I've been a year and a half at the bank. I'm 22 now. We must appreciate, we older ones, what the younger boys did to hold off the Arab attacks in these first 2 days. They died so that we could live. Why must young boys die? The Arab boys are no older. They cannot like it either. Why does Russia give them such toys? I do not mind if I stay 1 more month or 2 at the front, as long as the war will be over forever. I do not want it to come again in 5 years' time, when my brother will be old enough to fight. I just do not want it that way." 10:35 a.m. We reach Ginosar. The soldiers quickly get a lift northward in another car. The bank clerk has to be back at his camp in Rosh Pina at noon. And this is on the drive back. Sorry. 11:30 a.m. Leave Ginosar to drive back to Jerusalem. Decide to drive through the West Bank. At Afula, I give a lift to a policeman who is returning from his home to work in Jerusalem. 11:50, we reach Jenin, the first Arab town on the road from the Galilee to Jerusalem. The Israeli policeman is terrified of stopping the car in order to have a drink. He says to me, "Except near a police post, the Arabs could do something." But when I ask him whether there has been any incident between Arabs and Jews, he says, "No, I've not heard of any." 12:30 p.m. We reach the ancient city of Samaria. once capital of the northern Jewish kingdom, destroyed by the Assyrians when they, quote, came down like a wolf on the fold, some 2,800 years ago. The policeman who was driven on this road dozens of times will not go with me to visit the site, but sits instead under an ancient olive tree, clinging to the shade. In the car, we discussed Samaria. He had no idea whatsoever that it had any place in Jewish history, nor did he feel that it had any relevance or importance to Israel. This is all Palestinian, he says, pointing to the vast panorama of hills. 1 p.m., we reach Nablus. I want to stop for a cup of coffee, but the policeman says, don't stop, there could be trouble. Again, I ask him whether he knows of any specific incidents recently. But although he's very nervous of stopping, he says that he believes nothing has happened here since the war began. He will not come into the tea shop, but sits in the car. In the tea shop, a Palestinian asks, have you been to Tel Aviv? Yes, I was there this morning. What was happening? Nothing. Why do you ask? He has heard on the radio a statement by General Amin that Tel Aviv has been captured by the Egyptians and that Jerusalem is under attack. He is amazed to hear that this is not so and says, I think Sadat's solution is the right one. What solution is that? A ceasefire on the borders of before 1967. Monday, October 22nd. And this is a bit of the Russian aspect. 12 p.m. It appears that throughout the war, Russian immigrants have been arriving in Israel. The news has been kept very quiet, possibly for fear that the Arabs might make strong protests to Russia and force the flow to be cut off. It seems incredible that Russia should provide the Arab governments with the most devastating weapons, which are used to kill Jewish boys in large numbers, and should also at the same time allow a similar number of Jewish boys to leave Russia for Israel. The day before, a British journalist had asked me where she could find Russian immigrants. She wanted to do an article about their new quarters here, which she suspected were bad. Will the United Nations let me visit their camps? She asked. She had no idea that the Russian refugees are brought here, settled, and paid for by Israel alone, that the United Nations gives Israel no help whatsoever in resettling these destitute people, that the whole burden falls on Israel and on world Jewry, who are constantly providing funds for this very purpose. She has pressed me to show her the immigrant camps, so I drove her to see the 2 lots of immigrant housing estates, one near the Biblical Zoo and the other in Talpiot. But these are fantastic, she exclaimed. I thought they were in refugee camps. And she adds, sadly, many British families would envy them. And this is the last excerpt. October 24th and 25th, the ceasefire goes into effect. October 25th is Martin's birthday. And in fact, today is his birthday on the Hebrew calendar, which was part of the reason that we chose this date, Bethany and I, to talk about Churchill and the Churchill biography. This is the 28th of October. 7 a.m., drive from Jerusalem to Netanya, taking soldiers down to the coast. 10 a.m., return to Jerusalem, likewise with soldiers who were returning home on leave. Notes of a conversation. It is very sad. Some of my best friends have been killed. If only one friend is killed, it is sad. Alas, and it is many more than one. 2 p.m. news. As from tomorrow, Tel Shomer Hospital, the main military hospital, will again take in civilian patients. 2:15 p.m. There's much anxiety about the whereabouts of individual soldiers. I talked to a girl whose cousin has not been heard of for 5 days. 2:30 p.m. A small police post on the Bethlehem Road has been withdrawn. Here since October 6th, all Arab vehicles entering the city from the south were stopped and searched by 2 policemen and 2 policewomen. Many Israelis are expressing their relief that there was no conflict between them and the West Bank Arabs. No incidents, no sabotage, no deaths. The withdrawal of the police post shows that the fears that something will still break out are now over. I'm told 6 p.m. I'm told that between 3,000 and 5,000 Israeli children are now working in agricultural settlements, in factories, and at the post offices, in place of men who've been mobilized. They work for free and for a maximum of 2 weeks, doing a 7-hour day. Excuse me. Most of them are 16 or 17-year-olds. The wages that would have been paid to the workers will be paid direct to the Soldiers' Welfare Committee. One of the organizers of the scheme comments, "Why should the money go into the hands of the employers? The children have refused the money, saying that the work they do is their own contribution to the war effort. But they say the money must go somewhere and to a good cause." With every day that the mobilization continues, farms and factories are much harder pressed to get work done, fruit harvested, goods dispatched. Almost all the vans, trucks, and buses in the country have been mobilized. Business in the cities is done with emergency vehicles. Passing a Coca-Cola van with its headlamps on in the middle of the day, a friend, puzzled, had looked inside it. There were 3 coffins inside, on their way to the cemetery. I remembered how on the Day of Atonement, I'd asked a friend why there were cars in the streets with their headlamps on, and he had replied that in Israel, cars going to funerals kept their headlamps on during the day. In fact, those cars had been on their way to the front. The wheel has turned full circle. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Your voice held up remarkably well there. Well done. We really appreciate you coming, and not to mention coming when you're poorly, so thank you very much. It was incredibly moving for me on a personal level to hear so many times that sentiment echoed by the people that Martin was speaking with, that their hope that this would be the last war, particularly poignant at the moment, of course. And I think what comes out in what you've read us tonight is how good Martin was at getting the voice of ordinary people into his writing, and I think that's what makes it so special. We already knew that Sir Martin was a master chronicler, but it's incredible to hear how fastidious he was in recording real-time events. It made it quite an immersive experience for us.
In the excerpt that's in the Jewish Chronicle,
Mm-hmm.
At one point when he's driving to the Golan with this captain sitting next to him, the captain offers to drive instead because Martin's driving and writing, taking notes at the same time.
Wow,
So,
that's really quite something.
It was. Martin told me that while doing when he was researching the Churchill biography, he learned to take notes underneath the dining room table. So he took notes as people were talking, and hard to imagine how he could even read them afterwards.
Surreptitious notes. It's a good style. We were wondering, I was wondering, and also members of the audience, was that sort of diary note-taking something that Martin did all the time? Was that special about trips? Was that...
It was special about trips.
Right.
So on his website, I put 4, I think, excerpts from his private diaries. One was a summer that he spent in India in 1958, the Israel one in 1973, Poland in 1980, when he was researching his book on the Holocaust, and it was during Solidarity, and there was a lot going on, and one in Ukraine when he was there in 1991, I believe, when Ukraine became independent, and it was the first commemoration at Babi Yar, but I can't remember. But it's all there. But he really did it when he was traveling. And in fact, his published diary is Holocaust Journey, when he took his students in 1996 or 1997 to East Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Germany, and that will be republished in January, in fact. But there, it's also moment to moment where they were, what was going on, and the readings that he read at that particular place.
Brilliant. That actually answers another question that came in, which was where his diaries published. So one of them is and will be republished, you say?
Yes, yeah. But the diaries that are on the travel diaries that are on the website are not. They are part of his personal papers, and they would need much too much work to be published, and I don't think it will happen. But it was helpful to me, I think, during this difficult time to kind of immerse myself in this and be strengthened by it, by what he experienced in 73.
Absolutely. A message that I received privately was that obviously Martin will have had many trips to Israel. Was this the one that you think stood out most in his memories?
I I think so, because because he took these notes, and it was such a traumatic time for Israel, and he was there as it was unfolding, moment to moment, as they're sitting and they don't know what's going on, and they hear the siren, and they're desperate to get news, and his friends were involved, and Martin's friends. We all have friends, luckily, but Martin had friends like Yigal Yadin and Shimon Peres and Rabin, and people who were really at the heart of what was going on. So it was a quality that he had, where somehow he managed to find the people and become friends with them, and he believed. I don't know if there's any journalists here today, but he believes that you don't always know what's going on, that things are happening on a diplomatic level, on a political level, and you don't always know what's going on. And I think he saw that because he believed in that.
Absolutely. Our audience is uncharacteristically quiet this evening, probably reeling
That
from this.
is no other than me coughing. Nobody's coughing, nobody's sneezing, nobody's snoring.
We've got a few minutes if anybody wants to share any of their thoughts, and there's some thanks coming into the chat for your sharing. Thank you, Esther. And we did have a question which was partially answered, or answered in the chat, but maybe you can add to it. So Joe Oliver asked, I know Randolph Churchill was in Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War and later wrote a book about it, which would have been the time that Martin was working for him. Can you tell us anything about Martin's involvement on that work? You're laughing.
I'm laughing because I had a whole, as part of my introduction, I had a whole piece on that, and then I realized it was too long, and I cut it out. So when Martin was working, see if I can remember it now. When Martin was working for Randolph Churchill as part of his research team, he spent 3 days with Randolph and 3 days in Oxford, where he was teaching and writing and doing his own research. And Randolph called him in June, I think, 1967, in the middle of the night, and said to Martin, we're writing about the war. And Martin said, yes, I know. And he put the phone down because it was the middle of the night, and they were deep in writing about the First World War. So Randolph called back and said, no, we're writing about the Six-Day War. Before you come the next time, Randolph says to Martin, bring 5,000 words of the Jewish history from Moses to Nasser. So I said to Martin, did you really do that? And he said, yes, he did. He brought 5,000 words. They became basically the first chapter of Randolph's book is Martin's 5,000 words on the history of Jewish history from Moses to Nasser, and it also became the basis of Martin's Jewish History Atlas. So yes, he did write. I have it farther away than I can reach. But I have the book, and Randolph put an inscription to Martin and dated it August 67. So I believe that's when it came out. It's hard to imagine that a book could come out that quickly, but they were maybe publishing fewer books in those days, and they came out faster. But yes, he was involved in that. Martin wasn't in Israel, and I believe Randolph was not in Israel at the time, but I don't know exactly. I hope that helps.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. I've had a really interesting observation, which was also struck me when you were reading from Martin's war diary. So Eugene says he agrees about the very natural way that Martin reported his experiences, and it's fascinating that he seemed quite relaxed when he's talking about being in really perilous situations. Was that characteristic of Martin?
I don't understand.
He's
I
relaxed
think,
whilst others are not around him.
yeah, the the excerpt that I put in the Jewish Chronicle um, describes that he's not all that relaxed. I mean, they were in the Golan, and they were an area that was meant to be safe, and there was shelling going on, and he was not he was not relaxed, but he was still taking notes. I mean, he wasn't he was a historian who believed that what's happening right now will become history in 10 minutes. So but he was fairly relaxed. I think I I I don't know exactly, but the difficult times he's been under, from what I've heard, he's sort of had the strength to come through and not and not be panicked as I would be.
I've just
But I
had
don't know
another
whether
message. Sorry.
yeah, I don't know whether that's because he felt he had to be, but the idea of stopping in the West Bank, getting a coffee was more important to him, as long as he knew that there weren't any incidents happening. And he treated everyone as a human being. He treated everyone equally. So he would be able to listen to whatever people's views were, and not judge them on it. He writes in the introduction to Churchill and the Jews that he was interviewing someone who said, a friend of Churchill's, who said Churchill had one flaw, and Martin was writing the biography and got very excited. What is Churchill's flaw? And this man said Churchill was too fond of Jews. I mean, I would have got up and walked out, but Martin thought, oh, that's interesting. How did that express itself? What does that mean? And he delved into it. He really treated things equally, without involving himself and his feelings.
Somebody sent me a message to say they believe that a shell narrowly missed Martin by his own personal report.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
That
quite
was in the
something.
in the Golan. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I see that it's 8 o'clock here in the UK, and I'm aware that you are not feeling very well, Esther. I don't know if there's anything else you'd
I'm
like to
okay. I'm
say.
okay, but whatever you whatever you think, I hope it's been helpful to people in navigating these difficult times, to feel that there was an expression during the Holocaust, a Yiddish expression, which probably comes from the German Überleben, to get through this, to survive this, and live beyond this. And I think it's something that we all need to feel. And going back to history, and unfortunately, Jewish history has a lot of examples of this. Um, we will get through this, and hopefully we can learn from history and get strength from it.
Yeah, thank you. And there's many messages of thanks in the chat for you taking the time to share this with us. I think it's been really lovely. So thank you all for joining us today, and especially thank you to you, Esther. It's always a pleasure to host you, and I'm looking forward to when you'll come back and do your talk on
Me too.
Churchill, the biographies. So we will announce the date for that in due course. Um, in the meantime, please do all join us for our next event on the 30th of October, when Professor Derek Penslar joins us from Harvard University with a talk entitled Zionism and Emotion, From Love to Anguish. So another very, very relevant talk. So I hope to see you there. But thank you very much, Esther, and thanks to you all for joining us.
Thank you.